Thanks for joining us. I'm Scott Reese, Executive Vice President here at Autodesk. Thanks for joining our second in a series around self-care for our Fusion 360 community. All are welcome to join us. And today's topic is going to be working from home. And, what does it take to really create that positive routine? I think it's important for all of us around the world to recognize that we are in different parts of the world, and we are in different, we're experiencing the pandemic, in slightly different ways. So anything that we talk about here, it isn't a one size fits all. You kind of have to customize for what fits for you and the situation that you're in. But one thing that I've really taken away over the last year is that there's a lot to learn from just talking to one another, hearing about others' experiences. And here where I live, we're actually starting to talk about going back to the office some. And while today's session is about working from home and creating that positive routine, one of the things I would encourage folks to start thinking about is, as you start to go back to the office, whether it's full-time or at least part of the time, what elements of that routine that you've built up over the last year plus do you want to really hang on to, right? Because I think we've learned some things that are good, to hang on to, that aren't appropriate just in a pandemic alone. So, I would encourage some time for reflection. We're lucky to be joined yet again by Melis Jikalu and Michael Stevens from a company called Create Space, who are going to spend some time leading us through a conversation around creating a positive daily routine. Melis, Michael.
Thank you so much, Scott, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm based in Leicestershire in the UK. I am a wellbeing advocate for a charity in the UK called McHugh Mental Health, and I'm also the founder of Create Space. We're an organization. We design kind of programs which equip employees with tools and techniques to manage their own health and well-being. I've got my dog in the background who also wants to join in. At that point, I'm going to hand over to Melis.
Thanks, Michael. It's always nice to hear Susu chiming in. So hi, everyone. My name is Melis. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the program director at Create Space. And essentially, what I've been doing as well in my training as a coach and consultant for the last 10 years is really working at the intersection of creative industries, corporate and mental health industries to support businesses, future leaders, to really start embedding well-being in the workplace as a competitive advantage. And with Create Space, we've pretty much projected that as well into creating experiences and conversations as well that start to unpin what those key pillars of well-being might be. Specifically, I think with the pandemic that we've all experienced, it's never been more important to talk about these things. So I'll touch on that a bit further. Okay, so we're gonna just go straight in. And it's been quite an interesting reflection, and you heard from Scott talking about, the habits and even also positive habits and the ones that we want to carry and moving forward. But I think essentially to kind of start things off, it's so important to talk about the fact that, this past year we've all had to practice social distancing to really protect our communities from the spread of COVID-19. And many of us actually suddenly found ourselves working from home. I know the last time we spoke to Scott in one of these sessions, he talked about how this was something he'd never even done or even considered before. But we were looking at a bit of research in creating this webinar, and we found out that Pew Research Center had actually been asking questions throughout the year about Americans and their views and reactions as well to the pandemic. And it was specifically reflecting on the impact on home and working from home. And it showed how, work-life balance may have improved for some, but it actually sometimes disappeared for others. And we've got a slide there just touching on some key statistics, but it basically said that, 1 in 5 Americans, 23% actually described that it was how the pandemic had negatively impacted their job, their career, and of those as well who they know. And this was pretty much relating to individuals who had lost their jobs, whose maybe workflow had completely changed, or even were finding themselves feeling more stressed and frustrated working from home. And as a contrast, there were 13% mentioned that there were, positive benefits to working from home. And, this was mainly in a response to either discovering remote work for the first time, or, finding out that they could be more productive. And, the lack of commute allowed for them as well to maybe build that work-life balance. So depending on what, in what category you find yourself, I think it's important to acknowledge that even just the opportunity to being able to work from home is a privilege. And I'm sure that recognizing that sometimes is a bit bittersweet, because we've all had to adapt to these circumstances that were far from being easy. And don't know about you, but we're here to talk about routines, but I'm guessing it also meant that to a certain extent you had to reevaluate your habits and start to understand what moments were actually mostly important to you throughout the day. And you probably weren't used to thinking like this, specifically if you had a very mapped out routine, quite straightforward, or where your colleagues and teams were actually helping you to anchor yourself in this process and keeping on top of things. So if you imagine as well, everything else that's been taken away, the social connections, the very obvious distractions that allowed us to kind of move through, our work day to our home life, all of those separations have now been blurred. So today, we really wanted to start exploring how routine can actually help input some level of structure, but actually why having a routine is essential, but not necessarily any routine. We want to talk about how having a positive daily routine can help you create moments of success, of productivity and well-being, and that will help you benefit from a professional level, but also support your loved ones better. And we'll look at a specific framework that we call bookending. And this is something you can read on, but it basically seeks to, have morning and evening routines very defined and set. So like bookend, from one end to the other, with additional practices that transition throughout. And my conversation with Scott later on will actually help punctuate some of this content through storytelling. And we'll hear as well from him about some personal tips that he found quite useful. But just right before we go into, exploring positive routine, actually, what are some of the negative habits that we need to look out for? And there's no shame in that. I think it's quite important to say that we're probably all, to a certain extent, guilty of doing one or the other. And we've picked out some very interesting ones that were kind of tied to productivity and also well-being, and the negative impact that they may have had. And these include, and we'll have a slide on that, not getting enough sleep. That's one of the very important ones. We have also using your phone or your tablet in bed. Well, that sometimes, may be the automatic thing that we imagine doing when we wake up in the morning. That also can trigger our minds to go straight into productive mode without necessarily inviting moments to process, our state, moving from sleep to actually becoming awake and actually present and start to imagine what we want to do throughout the day. There's mindless eating, and also this, the next one, which is the obsession over things that we can't change. These two are sometimes interlinked because, mindless eating becomes this coping mechanism almost that, we can easily fall into. There's also sitting, for hours on end. We know that, yes, now that, even before when we were in our offices, we were advising or suggesting that we get up and move around, or even have people work standing up. But now working from home, some of us may have been used to finding the best situation, the best chair that's available there. We didn't necessarily have to rethink our decor in order to adjust to the pandemic. So we just did with what we had. And so that meant we kept postures that were sometimes very harmful. There's also about wearing headphones for too many hours, staying in this kind of bubble that keeps us focused in our cave, in our work cave, or even away, disconnected from the people around us. There's also points of having too many notifications. I don't know about you, but for me, this is something I had to completely scratch and just focus on the essential things, because sometimes we go into this mode where we feel we have to respond to everything. And those are similar to the last three, which is, spending time on screen, unplugging, which is something that a lot of us are finding very difficult at this time. And this goes back to, really not drinking enough water, taking breaks, and really feeling like we have to stay on top of things, and so finding ourselves multitasking with work tasks and home tasks. So it's quite important to put all of that out there and essentially say that none of these negative habits themselves is something that we can kind of imagine, or these are things that we practice habitually, consciously or unconsciously. And this is what human beings are. We just deal with what we know, we stick to what we know. And these routines, although they may have negative impacts on us, unless we become aware of them, we start to notice the changes and the impact in itself, we can start to shift away and start to embed practices that invite more stability. Specifically, why routines are so important is because it comes back to this idea of structure. And I talked about the bookending of your day, and that's incredibly important because they help keep your actions aligned with your goals. And even when we feel things or we experience anxiety that kind of rocks the boat a bit, we can still remember the things that we started with in the day and the things we go back to. So before you even start thinking, oh my God, all of these 10 habits I need to scrap everything off and start rewriting my routine, it's really important to start understanding why you make certain decisions. And we thought we'd touch on this because it's so important actually to understand how your brain works. And this is like going to the next slide, Michael. We need to understand how our brain works because when you decide to take on a new routine, however positive that may be, you might be super determined or even maybe not so determined, but you want to be able to, give yourself a schedule that allows you to kind of maximize on the benefits. But just be aware that you're not going to get the benefits very quickly. You have to be realistic in terms of the standards that you're setting in order to avoid failure. And it's important as well to recognize the implications of sticking to a successful routine. What is it that you're going to get out of it? We talked about positivity, but if that's not motivating enough for you, is it well-being? Is it time with your family? What is it that you're going to get out of it? Are you going to get more control of your life? Be clear as to what it is that you want to, take away from this routine and what it might give you. And this is the same thing about, the third point. What are the consequences of not sticking to your routine? If your routine gets the better of you, what is that going to make you feel like? For some people, it's frustration. I know for me, I tend to beat myself up, or even sometimes we want to cut corners and make things disappear, simply just give up. Really important for you to understand there that, getting your routine right is more important than actually what you're doing in it. Because if you look at, the points to, where we talk about the positive implications and the third one where we talk about the consequences, there's one point that's massively more empowering than the other. And so it's really clear what to aim for, the feeling, the good feeling and the positive impact. And it's easier to actually scale up than to scale down. So if you start small, it's really important that you just build on what is achievable for you. Because sometimes it's really, really, really hard when we set too high of a task and then we start falling back into negative patterns. And also, I think working from home, it's important to know that not all time is equal. Really recognizing the distraction factors over the course of your day is super vital, especially for those who are, living with their partners, have children, or who are also caring for their parents or even house sharing. Those high distraction factors are so important to manage or understand where you kind of place times of focus, where things are more intense, and just really weigh that throughout the day. And so essentially you also have pretty much everything to lose and nothing to gain by aiming too high, again, as I said, so don't feel guilty about it. Just really go with the flow and start small and really pick up from, where it feels right without necessarily, having some form of difficulty in the process. And just there, I think those key points allow us to kind of see that understanding and having a why behind those decisions, a reason why we want to move forward in our routine is super important if we want to, be more confident, but also work, to our strengths. So for the first part of this session, really, we wanted to go into the bookending, but the first part, which is about the morning routine and, why really, finding out actually morning routine habits for you to try for a better and more positive start to your day. So what makes, what could a sensible morning routine look like? We know that essentially a well planned out kind of herbal tea and yoga session, and I don't know if it's for you, but just simply a moment where you work out or you start the day powerfully, as in opposition to like a very hectic last minute coffee or cigarette. That's still a routine, but we know essentially that one is probably healthier than the other. And so morning routines, in just so much research, has been proven that it can be transformative. And the reason behind that is because it sets a mindset for you to, kick off the day with. And that mindset can actually eventually determine your mood and the mood that you remain in throughout the day. So we've got some key points that we feel and tips that you can use to kind of start building your personal morning routine. And the first one is the 7-minute delay. And this really speaks to starting your day powerfully, as I mentioned earlier. So, avoiding to pick up your phone, the first thing in the morning, that really is something that can just invite a moment of reflection where you invite the calm rather than starting to rush about the things that you need to do or feeling stressed and flustered. So just taking 7 minutes without your phone as you get out of bed. Maybe you can stretch, maybe you can walk around, you can get some water, just creating a bit more distance between your racing mind and your actual physical body for it to restore and arrive in the space as you wake is super important. The other one is about acknowledging and accentuating morning joys like coffees and tea. I don't know what your favorite is, if you have a morning beverage or something that tends to, really spotlight, that routine of what you do in the morning. It's important to make yourself aware of those small joys and really amplify them in some way, shape, or form. Whether you make that tea or that coffee a bit more, long lasting by going for a walk with it, by really taking that time to enjoy and savor it. That's also quite transformative. And the last one is about faux commutes, and essentially it's fake commutes. So remember when I talked about, those distractions where we used to get on the train or, walk to work. We had these moments that allowed us to really disconnect before we enter the work phase. And so introducing those moments back by simply just doing a walk around the block, even a walk around, your house even, and coming back and sitting back at your desk allows you to kind of collect your thoughts again. And so those are very interesting examples that we found very useful with some of our clients. And I know it can actually often be very hard to imagine these working for you. Perhaps you're like, okay, well, Melis, I'm actually feeling very swamped now. I don't feel like I have the time to add anything in. But what if you didn't need to add any extra time? There's this powerful habit that's called habit stacking. And it's a really amazing tool, essentially, that comes to finding a way of making habits quite time effective by just supercharging them onto one on top of the other. So really supercharging your existing routines and turning them into healthy, productive moments in your day. So example, very simple one is whilst you're getting ready to get dressed for work, which is something that we also recommend. Working in your pajamas isn't ideal because it almost keeps you in a sleep mode, but just getting your outfit on and also recalling maybe your favorite mantra could allow you to kind of do two things at once. If we go on to the next slide, we've seen that this tool, habit stacking, has actually been studied and is done and been shared in a lot of works, and specifically one of the books that I found super helpful, which is called The Miracle Morning. And it's basically setting the premise of how establishing a very personal morning routine can be founded on specific tools. And it was Hal Elrod who wrote the book, but he talked about this framework called SAVERS. And this talks about silence, affirmation, visualization, exercise, reading, scribing, and writing. And so following this flow or this personal morning routine and process actually has been found to help people achieve their personal goals, but also whilst keeping a very positive mindset, introducing exercise, which is a vital part. Doesn't have to be for very long. It can just be doing 10 minutes of each. And also, reading allows people to expand their minds and actually stay off screens. And even sometimes by creating that level of space, it allows people to start imagining how they can make use of their free time and specifically spending that time with their family. So I really encourage you to kind of check it out. We can drop the name in the chat if you want, but really invite you to reading that and seeing how that lands for you. Going back again to the morning routine, I think it's important to acknowledge as well the business morning routine, because you probably already have some sort of business morning routine established, whether you recognize it or not. You know, what do you typically do when you arrive at your desk? You know, are you processing emails? Are you browsing on social media, or you just deep kind of dive right in to your highest value priority? These type of tasks and this routine, I think, is very unique to your role and what's necessary and mostly important. So the tips we can give you on that is firstly to just identify the habits that make your business morning routine, the essentials, and then start to tweak them based on your goals. And also start aiming for just the activities or tasks that will allow you to just be a bit more productive. And that, to a certain extent, I think may mean that you might take or kind of choose to put making phone calls and reviewing your current projects as first things that you do. Or, as I said, again, just probably leaving social media browsing for your first scheduled break. You know, you might find that some of the habits that you have built into your business morning routine might be best interchanged with habits that you do in your evening routine. And, you know, just figuring out where you have more or less energy depending on your homework situation and environment. And whatever those habits are, you know, you decide, actually, it's important to decide to engage with them really as part of this morning routine, because that specific focus on your business, will allow you to start building foundations that will allow you to be productive. And when we are also feeling fulfilled and productive at work, that also translates into our home life. In the next slide, actually, we found that it's a great way to kind of segue into, because we can talk about the business routine, but whilst we're working, we can spend hours on end on work, but it's also super important to start considering breaks. I'm not sure how you are with taking breaks. I know for me, this is something I've had to just religiously introduce, but taking breaks actually have been shown to be so important in recovering from stress, which in turn actually improve your performance. You know, recovering from work stress can restore energy and mental resources and decrease the development of fatigue, sleep disorders, and cardiovascular disease. And so you may wonder, well, how do I kind of maximize that downtime, those break times? So we've got a few tips on these to share with you. And essentially, it's about personalizing your breaks. You know, you can probably spend, you know, hours on end, but we usually suggest that taking a break after maximum 2 hours is essential. Don't wait too long. There's many techniques out there and applications that might help remind you to take a break. If you need an alarm, you can set those as well using these apps. You can also, as a second point there, integrate micro breaks, you know, for water, for stretching, for mini meditations, whether it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you name it, whatever is right for you. You can also do that in a short frame of time. The third one is about upgrading your lunch break. And lunch breaks are so important because this is where we start to refuel our body as well. And so in those breaks, you can either take a short walk. You know, we know that taking some fresh air is super important to reset our emotional states. And also walking kind of stimulates both hemispheres of the brain and aids to, you know, facilitate cognitive processing. So really figuring out problems. And also it helps us stand up, which means we're actually breaking that kind of ratio of constantly sitting. We're actually introducing standing in the process. Maybe it is that you want to carve time to actually eat with your family. We know that that can be super beneficial as well in the process. And so last point there, I think, actually last 2 points. My favorite one actually is about taking naps. Take a nap if you need one. I know for me, changing countries, I used to live in London, now I live in West Africa in the Ivory Coast, and weather-wise, it's completely different. And so it tends to get very hot at certain times, and my body itself is either dehydrated or needs to relax. So taking short naps, depending on your schedule specifically, and ideally before lunch, is essential. So if you can take a short nap, do that, and just avoid going to bed or taking a nap after lunch, because you might end up feeling more sleepy, fatigued, and actually a bit groggy. And the last one I think is so essential, is about creating boundaries. With everything that we touched on about the morning routine, personal or business, it's so crucial to understand how you can set boundaries around all of those activities. Boundaries might sound like a very brutal, powerful word, but all it means is informing the people around you who need to know about it that this is what you'll be doing and why it's important for you. So just consider, who it is that you might need to engage with in order to implement these practices. Because one thing that we have seen throughout the pandemic, and specifically with people working from home, is that anxieties of what's going on at home and at work have morphed into this one big mass. And so we know that these two environments and all of the people involved in that are also required to take part in our process, in our progress, if we want to be more productive and also be healthier in our lives. So again, there's a slide, they're talking about reclaiming time. And this is why we feel it's so important to avoid getting overwhelmed. So I know that was a lot of information, and I'm going to pause there for now. And before we go to my conversation with Scott. So we've got a bit of time as well. And I'm sure we wanted to actually put out some polling questions, which we wanted you to kind of take part in. So you should be able to see them on your screens. So I'm seeing one pop up. And also, as you do that, we also invite you to just drop questions in the chat, or if there's anything that you feel you want to share, if you want to, just feel free to do so. We have a Q&A box there as well, which you can drop us questions, and we'll be happy to answer them.
There's just a word missing off that. So it should say, how has the pandemic impacted your job or your career? And that's positively, not at all, or negatively.
Thanks, Michael.
And then we can go to the next one, maybe, Ryan. So this is what is the biggest challenge you face in the process of implementing a new routine? Would you say that it's the lack of time, lack of structure, lack of desire, maybe lack of focus? Or do you see kind of family commitments getting in the way, or work commitments? I think for me, it's lack of time. And then maybe the next one, which is in terms of...
1 minute, Michael. Sorry, I'm curious to see the results there.
Oh yeah.
Wow. We've got clearly, lack of focus coming up first there, and lack of time. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, so the next one was, in terms of the number of hours worked, would you say that you found yourself working more, less, or the same as pre-pandemic?
Probably say more.
Yeah, more.
I mean, if you count
the
self-work.
results.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Yeah. But so it's almost over 50% are saying more. Okay. And then the final question, which is just around, how do you currently relax and unwind at home? And do you use any of these well-being practices already?
Yeah, I know. I found Pilates quite hard to do, even on YouTube, but definitely yoga, meditation.
I love going for a run.
Yeah.
Where's the dog out? Okay, can we see the results of that one, please, Ryan?
Oh,
lots of runners.
Gosh,
great.
I can't save my life.
Do you have the results of the first question, Ryan? Sorry, or can we go back to that one, or?
Okay. Wow. Yeah, it's a negative impact. Thank you all for actually taking part in this. I think it's so interesting to not only understand, overall, but just the picture paint a picture in our minds as to what's relevant, what's going on for you. But also when we're talking about impact, all of you mentioning that it has to a certain extent, I mean, almost 50% saying that it has had a negative impact, only begs the question as to what's really changed, where is that negative impact mostly felt? I know in jobs and career, but what has played a massive role in making it so? So this actually is a great segue to my conversation with Scott. I know also we've got some awesome questions in the chat, which we'll address at the end. Scott, are you back in the space with me?
Of course. Yep. Hey, Melis. Yeah, I took note about taking a nap. I have not incorporated that, but I aspire to incorporate that somehow.
Yeah. I'm glad. Please let me know when you do it and how you feel afterwards. But Scott, I thought we can have another conversations really as we're talking about the last time you shared so many good bits, but let's start, talking and have you share actually how you've possibly kind of reimagined your routine, and just maybe if you could expand on some of the negative habits that you were keeping and that you had to rethink.
Yeah, so a lot's changed, and a lot of people are reflecting on what has changed. One of the things that's interesting is change was not optional. So we were kind of thrust into working differently. And I'll never forget the first couple of weeks, maybe even the first month. I just resisted the whole thing. Like, working from home is not something that I ever enjoyed. It's not something that I ever did. And all of my muscle memory, all of my habits were based on being in an office 8, 9, 10, 11 hours a day, and then commuting an hour each way on each end of it. So reimagining my day, took some time and took some effort, but about a month into it is when I really said, hey, this thing's going to last, so I better just strap in and figure out how to be better as a result. So, some of the negative things that, I had to purge, or chose to purge rather, like I never ever took a lunch that I can remember, like a scheduled lunch where I just took time away and took a breath. And, what I started to recognize, working from home is like my whole family's here. Right. And so I've never had a chance to have lunch with my family. And we just started making a routine of, I'm going to block an hour at noon every day, and we're going to sit down and have lunch. So, just having meals with the family is one of the things that through the week we had never really had the pleasure to do, because, by the time I, work until 6 or 7 in the office and then commute home, people are kind of winding down by that time. So we never had structured lunches together. We never had structured meals together. And it's one of the things that we were lucky enough to be able to incorporate.
Really good point there about, incorporating family time and almost like this stacking it with lunch. And I'm wondering as well, in terms of specific challenges that come up for people, I mean, you work in a global business, and I'm wondering in terms of time and where you have to stay on, what were the actual challenges that you experience on that front? Because I think being at home means you can just access your computer and do what you want at any time of the day. Did you have to review anything on that front?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's super important for people, certainly during the pandemic, but I would encourage everyone to think, post-pandemic as well, is you have to create boundaries. And yes, we have employees everywhere, we have customers everywhere, we have suppliers everywhere, and that means that it's daytime for somebody all the time. And if you have to interact with those folks, it may be at an inconvenient time for you. So all throughout my career, there's evening calls, morning calls, weekend calls, etc. And some of that's just it just kind of is what it is. One of the things I've gotten better about is kind of creating some boundaries, though. I'm happy to take a call at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, but it needs to be important, right? It can't be just a routine call. And I've tried to be more intentional as well, that when I schedule something and there's someone in there where it's 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night for them, it better be important, right? For me to schedule it and expect them to be there. So I think all of us can just be more aware of what boundaries we need to set for ourselves, but also be more aware of the burdens that some of our actions cast on others, right? Because we're all in this uncomfortable situation together, and we can really help one another.
What I heard there was a lot about communication, also for yourself, understanding what the requirements are when you're making these adjustments, or really inviting extra time to be had on your schedule, but also being mindful of the impact on other people. That's such a great tip on boundaries. And I'm wondering, Scott, did you have any other essential tips that you could share with everyone, just as to how you were able to optimize and find balance whilst working from home and in a positive way as well?
Yeah, and for a lot of me, there was certainly, for me, there was my experience, but then there was also my actions and how they impacted others' experience as well, right? And as being a leader of a large organization, I had to become more aware that when I send an email on Saturday morning, it might just be me clearing my inbox. It's certainly not urgent, but for people who may receive that email, they may have been on a walk with their kids or with their family or doing something, that's important to them. It all of a sudden, seems urgent to them that they need to like stop doing what they're doing and reorient their day. It wasn't my intention at all. I was just clearing my inbox. So I've had to become a lot more intentional, and I would encourage all of us to become more intentional with, things like that. For example, I've stopped replying to a lot of emails on the weekend. If I know that it, one, isn't super urgent, and two, may create some sense of urgency for someone on the other end of that. All of us we have enough urgency in our lives. False urgency, isn't helpful. So even if I respond to emails, Outlook has this nice little feature where you can say, send it on Monday morning, right? So I've tried to be more intentional with leveraging that capability so that I still get to clear my inbox, because that's important for me to be able to clear my head and be able to enjoy myself, but it doesn't create a false sense of urgency for someone else.
Really, really good ones in there, kind of the reply to emails on the weekend. I think specifically in your leadership position, this is something that we've seen, often kind of triggers other people to do the same and follow suit. And I'm thinking, as you talk about these positive, implementations that you kind of put in place, I'm going back to the first slide where we talk about the why, understanding the why behind this positive changes that we want to make. And that leads quite often to understanding your motivation. And I'm wondering for you, what was the very thing that allowed you to, remember why you were in that situation, to keep you motivated and keeping positive habits moving forward?
Well, the interesting thing about the pandemic is, it wasn't optional, right? So it didn't matter why. It was just that, it's not going away. So either, be better or not. And, something that I had tried to start to subscribe to pre-pandemic, but it certainly helped me in the pandemic, is something I learned from a book called Atomic Habits. I may have referenced that actually in the first one as well, written by a gentleman named James Clear. And that book really helped me understand that, small changes, while today or tomorrow, maybe even this month, don't necessarily seem that impactful. It's like interest in the bank. They compound, right? So don't be afraid to make small changes and just trust that over time, they're really going to make a big, big difference. So, it's when we try to make huge changes that, eventually we either get bored or we lose focus, and then they kind of fall off. But if you can pick the small things and stay committed to them, it's easier to stay committed. And then you ultimately end up, getting the benefit that you're after. So, pay attention to small changes matter. Atomic Habits.
Thank you so much for all of this, Scott. I love the mention on the small changes. I think, listening to a podcast where someone mentioned, or it wasn't an athlete, but he said that at the beginning of every day, he would just shoot a hoop and just kind of score naturally, just so he puts himself in that mindset that he's already winning. And that's small and maybe insignificant because there's no competition around, but sometimes just for that relationship with the self, and sometimes a negative and thought pattern.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think a lot of basketball players, you never leave the court on a missed shot. right?
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Scott. As always, you helped me kind of segue into the last and second module, which is really about, well, the evening routine. And with this one, we wanted to start again reviewing why the evening routine is actually just as important as our morning routine. It's like the last piece of the bookend. And before we kind of cover that, really looking at the positive impact of the evening routine, I wanted to touch on a specific point, and this is where we ended with Scott about motivation, but this is really about positive reinforcement, because throughout the day, as you practice these new habits, even those small changes, although they may be healthy and positive, well, they may not always feel good at the beginning or feel like an easy task. So we've seen that actually athletes themselves, do this kind of pre-play routine before in coaching themselves for a specific performance, and that actually helps them enter, explore stressful situations with a feeling of competence. So just sitting there and playing out your day in the morning, if you have starting to write up this morning routine, this evening routine, just play it out. Try to start to see where those moments of success will be, because it helps create a sense of security in what you're doing. And it's not so unexpected when you find yourself doing something and therefore become less distracted because it's something that you saw coming. And it's also very normal to experience anxiety. I mean, especially on the days when you're feeling overwhelmed in your schedule, or like your home and work kind of duties go straight from 0 to 100. And when we feel anxious, we tend to instantly just want to feel calm, but it actually takes much more time, and it's actually more difficult to move from a state of anxiety to relaxation, because it's quite a big jump. So moving on the opposite side from anxious to excited is actually not a big jump at all, because psychologically these two states are identical. So just if you're struggling, if you experience regular moments in your day where you feel anxious, ask yourself, just what happens before that moment, or how you can punctuate it with moments of excitement. And we also have a client who just says, just get excited, get excited, get excited, get excited, say it 3 times. And it sounds very silly, but it helps kind of get the body into, reconnect or re-identify as well the same state, and also bring, some level of positivity in the process. And so we'll go straight into looking at the business evening routine, because that's also quite essential. We're not going to just leave the day and not wrap things up on the work front. And no matter what habits you currently engage in as part of your business evening routine, make actually performing a daily review one of them. Completing actually a daily a review each evening before leaving your desk, closing your laptop, or going back to anything else that you have to do outside of work, helps still keep things fresh in your mind, and specifically looking at what you have to plan for the next day or have to do for the next day. So just review, sometimes actually start there by reviewing your current day task, and just ask yourself, what went wrong? What is it that you can improve on? What is it that's actually lagging and that needs to be addressed tomorrow, and how you might be able to do that? We've seen that it helps build an intention around your work. And also, this is something that even top fighters actually do, because they tend to, sit and visualize, how their training has gone, and just start to put things together, reevaluate, but also it helps invite a level of calm. And it also, as I said, allows you to start previewing the following day and the task and everything that might overflow. And one specifically, a specific important point there is also about making adjustments as called for. Because yes, to a certain extent, there are things that are super important, but there are also things that we can negotiate. There are conversations and communications that we can have in order to just reframe our day. And this is where, when we talk about boundaries, it's very important to understand what we're able to commit to and not commit to. The last point as well was super essential there, and it's about clearing off your workspace. I mean, when we're talking about, working from home, I don't know where you place your laptop or where you sit. Maybe some of us are finding ourselves working at our kitchen table. That's usually not where the office is meant to be. So leaving things behind that remind us of work actually sometimes help trigger our mind into that work mode, or remind us of the things that we haven't done, and triggers that critical mind. And so it's quite important to clear off wherever you are, just put your things away, just as you would in a normal office, or just clearing your desk. And it also helps create a level of just cleanliness and ease around when we know that there's a bit more space that's available around us. The last one, again, is about the full commute, which I mentioned. Just as you could, get out of the house and come back to your desk in the morning, when you actually end your workday, well, you can actually just close your laptop, go around the block once again, and actually begin your, home time, and really essentially start unwinding into that personal time. And why I say that is because winding down is actually not as easy as we imagine. And in order to wind down effectively, we need to be in a state of psychological rest. And that is what allows us to heal and recover, and even sometimes digest our food properly, also find sleep, as well as relaxing properly in order to connect with people. And research has shown that carrying our work stress into our evenings and night times can result in struggles like insomnia, IBS, and other sorts of digestive issues, these illnesses, or sometimes even injuries that linger over time more than they actually should. So how do you go about maximizing your personal evening routine? It goes back again, same as a review, but really starting to identify the habits that you have been doing consciously or not, and then analyze what it is that's actually working for you. You might probably watch, a recorded show, or walk your dog, or read, or play with your kids, or I don't know what it is for you, but it's all about understanding where your endorphin releases are. So these are your feel-good hormones, and when they are needed in the day. And specifically, we found in research that they're mostly needed to close the day, because they help reinforce positive affirmations about who we are, or help us connect a bit more on an emotional level. And so that might be, as I said, hugging your partner or your children, or stroking your pet even. So just consider what activities you should include in your personal evening routine to ensure you achieve those long-term personal goals that are also centered around well-being. As I said, connection is a massive thing. And so even if you don't have anyone in your space, you might want to phone a real friend, because we're constantly talking to employees, to colleagues, and we might need to have conversations that actually nourish us, speaking to people who make us feel like us, and where we don't require, anything else than just being ourselves. And that's super important. The last point we wanted to touch on is about unrolling. So just taking that time to not assume any role, again, shutting off, unplugging is a big part of that, where we take time to step away from screens. If you want to call it an evening delay or an evening curfew, call it what you will, but it's about just taking that time to do something that brings your body down and helps you just relieve stress. I've added there with Michael as well, and this is something that for me specifically, I found super useful. Taking a very long shower can help you, your physical self change states. And it's super powerful when you've had a very heavy day. I think a lot of therapists actually use that as a bit of a secret to just create a break and even visualize themselves washing off any stresses that kind of stuck to them throughout the day. It's so powerful to use these small techniques, because being busy for some reason in our society has now become this badge of honor. And so it's about working smart and not working hard. But if you're giving yourself 110% to work, try this, 80%, 80-30 rule, where, the latter part is really about being and creating time for yourself. We talked about, boundaries being so important. This is another point that we want to go back to again. And it's about saying that boundaries are are a radical act of self-care. And so if you're actually working late, as Scott mentioned earlier, it's really important to be clear about how you structure that time. And sometimes, as I said, inviting your team into those conversations, your family and those around you, to support you in that process. So you've got to, we've come to the end of the session really, and I thought we can just take a bit of time to kind of recap before we move to questions. So as we touched on earlier, here's some negative habits that we want to start banishing from our daily routine. And that's essentially what impact us on a professional level, personal level, but really help to kind of dampen that productivity and well-being. And that's not getting enough sleep. That's sitting, for hours on end, spending too much time on screens, not taking breaks, multitasking with home and work tasks. Those, I think, you could probably agree with me. I'm not sure if you've had any positive benefits from them, and I'd be really impressed if you did. But those are some of the major things that we've seen play a big part in really making our days actually feel more heavy and create even anxiety in the process. We'd want to start looking at more positive, healthy habits that we can include moving forwards. And we touched on those throughout the session. But these are actually about reviewing your morning and evening business routine, being clear on what these tasks are, what are you actually doing, and just understanding where your priorities are and how you can start maximizing and aim for the productive elements of your routine. Unplugging again, yes, work, but also make time to step away from your work, clearing off your workspace to create some form of just clarity and different energy as you transition from these states of working to moving from home. Taking breaks as well, super important to just create a distance again between your work life, your home life, and even creating distance with your work and the problems that you're seeking to solve. And lastly, boundaries, which I think we've all emphasized on already. There's this last quote we'll leave you with. And I find that quite beautiful because it just says that, you'll never change your life until you change something you do in your daily routine, and how the secret to your success is found in your daily routine. And that's by John Maxwell. We used another quote from John Maxwell last time, but essentially what he talks about there is, how wellness doesn't have to be so complicated. Having a positive routine is essential, especially if we want to be able to better manage stress and anxiety. And stress, as we know, is a natural response to the body. As for anxiety, we know that we're all thinkers, and we can end up thinking a lot. But the most important aspect of wellness is our ability to turn our thinking on when we need it, but also being able to turn it down when we don't need it. And so prioritizing connection with ourselves and our families is super important. So I'll leave you there with this, and then we can go off and start talking about questions as well that may have come up. Okay. So we've had questions that have been answered already. Any questions we can put up there? How can you put a boundary around the hours I am working when my boss works different hours? Scott, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so look, so many of these things come down to a conversation. I've been answering a few questions. I think one of the things we have to recognize is we all have a limit. And when we start breaking those boundaries and exceeding those limits, it starts eroding our health and happiness. So, have the conversation, with your boss. If it's a time zone issue, find the hour that overlaps, within your time zone, or the 2 hours that are, most convenient, and just say, hey, can we agree to, have our interactions when it's not urgent, be within, this hour or 2 hours. Find both synchronous and asynchronous ways to communicate as well. So, here at Autodesk, we use Slack, and Slack doesn't necessarily have to be responded to straight away. We become, grossly addicted to email, and not everything is urgent. I would encourage you to really consider what has to be discussed or responded to, like, right now, and what can wait until tomorrow, even if it is from your boss. Just because your boss sent it to you and it landed in your inbox at a weird time for you, doesn't mean you have to respond right now. So
I would just add to that really understanding what your priorities are is quite important as well. So if, for example, your family is your priority, and perhaps you're assigned a project where you know you'll be working kind of all day and all night for the next 6 months, then that could be kind of a point of conversation with your boss. I think it's important to communicate clearly kind of what your priorities are, but also be prepared to negotiate a bit. I think we kind of also need to understand that right now is probably quite a difficult time for everyone. And yeah, like you said, setting boundaries, but presenting kind of some solutions as well that could focus on a more win-win situation.
So this question about working out in the morning or evening has come up a couple of times, and I responded to whoever asked it, but maybe not everybody can see that. And my response is certainly not a scientific one. But I can just tell you, if I don't work out early in the morning, the chances of me working out go to near zero. Because by the end of the day, my motivation's gone, I'm exhausted. So I've tried to create a routine where it just happens super early in the morning. But that's what works for me. I think this is an area where we have to find what works for each of us. But that's certainly what works for me.
Yeah, I think science it doesn't matter, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it touches on, Scott, what you said there about the habit stacking, like making sure it's actually part of a process so that you just don't miss it. I know for me, like you, Scott, if I exercise late in the day, it means it's amping my body up and I struggle to go back to sleep when I've kind of put out or, released a lot of energy. So again, it's about finding what feels right for you. And again, we don't know what your schedule looks like or what clock you're working on. So just figure it out. I think according to that is super helpful, but don't make it too close to you going to bed because you might still be activated and not.
Get the endorphins going. The other thing that I've just gotten comfortable with is, I used to think, well, if I can't find an hour, I'm just not going to work out because it's not going to make a difference. We're lucky enough to have a Peloton that my wife and I use, and they have 20-minute classes, and if I only have 20 minutes, I'll do a 20-minute class instead of a 45-minute class or an hour class, right? It's better than nothing, and it keeps the routine going. So again, atomic habits, small things compound and add up over time.
Okay. There's that one about naps, isn't there? Well, to be fair, I think usually we'd say, what about 20 to 30-minute naps, really seeing what works right. But I would also encourage you to actually just check out the research on naps, because essentially what scientists have advised is to kind of do one sleep cycle, because this is where it feels quite restorative. And I think it was something about the NASA and how astronauts usually kind of sleep in these short cycles and why it's so restorative to keep them. But those are 90 minutes. And I'm sure a lot of people don't agree that taking a nap for 90 minutes is actually useful, but it's about finding what feels right for you. But the essence there is that you are in a space where it's quite enough for you to go into that deep sleep where you're able to just feel restored and not kind of staying on surface levels, or where you're just thinking about your work and what you need to do. Otherwise, just get up and do what you need to do. So I'm not sure your thoughts, Scott, since you'll be trying out a nap.
Yeah, I'm not a napper. I love watching golf, and that's one of my routines. I love watching golf on Sunday afternoons, and it always leads to a nap. I don't know if there's a connection there, and I always feel better as a result. But through the week, I don't know if I can give a good advice there. One thing, maybe as we wrap up here, somebody's asking a question about, do I turn my PC or my mobile phone off in the evenings? Again, I think you have to figure out what boundary's right for you. I'm probably a bad one because I at least keep an eye on what's coming in all through the evening, just in case there is something urgent. One thing I've done, and I think my Apple Watch something did this for me. I don't recall doing it intentionally, but I get a bedtime reminder at whatever time it thinks it's time for me to go to bed. And one of the things that it does, again, this was accidental, this is not something I did, but I appreciate it, is that when that happens, it turns my phone on do not disturb, right? So it's not buzzing all night long or beeping all night long. It's on do not disturb. And you can add people, whoever they are, your children, your boss, whoever, to be able to still call you, through that do not disturb. If it's, but that's something that in the pandemic that, again, accidentally I've discovered, and it has worked because those meaningless things aren't kind of, waking you up in the middle of the night or enticing you to check them out. So those things can wait till the morning. All right, so Melis, Michael, thanks once again to the two of you for leading us on this journey. I think all of us take something away every time we get together. Thanks to all of you who took the time out of your day to join us. Even if we take one thing away from it, we're better as a result. So with that, we'll call it a wrap, and we will look forward to seeing you in the next session.